Boundary recognition of timelines, set lines of sequence over codification lines at codex. Codifies your line course centers into line position in case consistent through zeros and ones. We have to start to modify your settings and understand how to do it through the higher self. You have to type in the send the next lowercase set in binary vortex lines of communication. And for us to identify these things, it's true to understand how we see this in modification and settings. Okay, it's a travel works on timeline, set frame line, course send, convert system all through travel, converts the set lines to calculate screen location sending travel. Zeros and ones are going through line position right now, all through binary coding, right? So mapping system in lines of travel, okay? Touching anything of scanning position outside line, inside lines travel, okay? Barcode works on time frame, correlates, calculate, and modify, planetary alignments, mapping sequence, mapping screen lines, mapping pi. So it indicates everything in flux, computer cloud above line rotation, binary coding going inside the body, and retraction. Now, this all modifies how we formulate and simulate our inner line setting of empty space and our outer line setting of all levels. Inner space of emptiness, outer space of emptiness, okay? Inner space of knowing, outer space of knowing. All levels, how you see the acknowledgments of you and set position of travel, okay? The inner course to the outer course, inner realm, outer space, inner space, outer space, inside of you, right? But the inner space has to be empty and the outer space has to be empty. That's the balance. So you have to understand how to understand seeing the body as an empty space, because that's where you are provision. But you also have to understand the outer space, which is solid matter. You have to get out at the solid mass of your system, which is body conception of inception itself. So you formulate and simulate yourself into the actual dreamer in real time, that you become the dreaming that you are through dream. Now, that comes in interpretation, how you see it through a binary. A binary is how we speak. Without binaries, there's no running system. Without binary, there's no correlations of panel. Without binaries, there's no cloud, e-cloud, central cloud, or eternity cloud. How we modify these things is all through codifications of encryption. Now you understand how to use that through an algorithm, right? An algorithm is a running operation of a clocking system that changes the foundations of its binaries that recoded, calculate, modify the codex, directing line say location setting in seconds, minutes, and hours. So your algorithm runs encoding a communication setting and confirmation system into information bits. Processing that through the seconds, minutes, and hours sets the clocking screen line adaptation to a new algorithm at set lines of position. How you see that on platforms, how you see that in travel, how you see that in correlations, how you see that in communications through your CPU. Okay? Your compute system, your processing settings, your initials, okay? Your position, location, your performance, or anything through your operation system. Understanding the imagination is to understand the foundations of zeros and ones, okay? Zeros and ones is a position of a trail. Its direct location is to a segue, to a highway. Now, it's all position of planes. Like that, really, really fast, right? So the zeros and ones are on two rails. It's at position north, west, south, and east. Okay, so it's like going on a road. And on the road, in the center of operation, is you and travel. You don't go left, you don't go right. The modification is an energy force. It's a vortex. It's a magnetic force that pushes you in travel, right? And it's all identified through zeros and ones, has a constant continuous flow through a gravitation system, right? It's a gravitational pull. A center going this way, a center going that way. But the outer ring is the zeros and ones. The inner ring is the intersection of zeros and ones. So how you identify that is through the positive, negative, the truth, and the false narratives of you and travel, okay? So try to understand the zeros and ones is created through all lines of your inventories. That creates a supercharging highway, because that's what your body is through infinity age cycle. Okay, it's like a treadway. It's like a runway. How a plane basically takes off. How it comes this way, and then it comes up, and then it levels out, right? So it's like this, up, levels out, right? That's what numbers do. They travel all at once, all setting, all in set position segues. So it's a systematic line course centers location near existing lines and grounds that process course centers of your widths that puts the altitude levels of location system into your Y-line centers. Now, Y-line center is processing you and location setting how you unification system out through windows and track location of frames. Now, it's going to get very complicated, right? But you have to identify these things. Because after today in travel, humanity's body is going to be all lines out of all communication transparency into translucent. The communication along line centers, operators and units will be in radioactive, and the activators will be in rainbow shower. That puts all communication convergence system in travel. Okay, so let's get set position of binaries. Okay, zero track location, one lines of set position of symbolism. Core trainers, position lines of setting, how to process inline direct location light language. You have to get a light language and get into the binaries. Okay, how you communicate to a computer, how a computer talks to a phone, how a phone talks to its digital pad, or how anything talks to itself through codifications of encryption. Right? Encryption is lock and signal. Okay, modifies like locking a door in a house with a key. So you're sending the codes to the encryption locations that sets lines position. You start to recognize how to use your computer through default classification system, enabled and enabled line connect setting, process, calculate, screen location system, all through erase, delete, or line communicates to its application system, all through setting of general setting. So what you guys have to start to understand is how to motivate your systems and understand how to see everything around you through codification lines of binary. Okay? All right, so let's go through triangulation lines of 1 over line sequence, location line, connection setting, convergence system. We'll just go through graph screens and 4 settings of sequence. Okay? Travels on line conditions, right? Nothing in that position, but if I bring it in, okay, we put in the numbers. Right? Numbers indicates time frame of clocking lines as settings. Okay, so process location. All right, so it's all set, ready to go. Okay, so that's just lines of travel. So here, direct lines of link. Let's get indicate settings of travel. 4 centers in position of 4 segues. Okay, so we'll go through that. And we go 0, 1, 0. We'll just start with 3 panels. All right, and then we'll go position. So everything around you is in its own binary of its own cloud, and how it comes into its own classification setting of its units, cores, divergent allegiance, and alliance. Alliance is a information setting that keeps binaries a binding system into correlation and calculation screen lines. All right, so setting line set lines of sequence. We'll just start with 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 0, and set lines of set location to its highways and convergence system to its inventories. Set lines set location and convergence system all through travel. Okay, just zeros and ones. Okay, because you have to understand how to use your alpha and your betas to your all lines of position, your waves. Radio signals, guys, radio signals. Coming to position location of systems all through radioactive signals, coming into lines of radiation signals, gamma signals, operation signals. Everything identifies line communications. Without the zeros and ones, you can't move or talk. All right, because it's a running motivation system that moves everything of its own treadway, which is its own runway, which is its own stairway. Anything that position has a movement set position, its operating setting. Nothing is standing still. On standby, yes, but it's very powerful how everything runs its own operation of its own system, which identifies everything through setting. So it's like a train on a track. Okay, well, there's zeros and ones on that platform that pushes the train, and they calculate modifies to its rails, right? But they're magnetic force rails. They're clips. They clamp in the system and they go through the rails. It's like a streetcar where it has line conditions of a wire on top, and it goes through a rail. It goes through its line signal. It goes through the electrical line, its electrical pole, right? So everything's magnetic. Now you travels in position lines that calculate screen location of zeros and ones, right? Then you go through graph screens. Okay, so we're setting up a graph line. Okay, which is a paragram, graph course centers, location, and line settings, process communication setting, and central communication its convergence. Okay. Okay, see, I'm moving it all at once, right? Okay, so what's going on in set position with system, right? What's changing, right? So 0 is now triangulation. This is a box, and line position, this is a Y line center. This is number 2, and this is number 3. And that's just on the ground. Right? So as I go like this, it constantly changes the number of lines of frame, right? So every binary code changes lines of setting. Now it depends on where you are in position line to its bedding system all through travel. There's a bedding lines of set lines of position 1 over 2, 3, 6 lines, 9 lines, 12, 24, 48, 72, 144. Right? It's converts the system. Now you change time frame, change the particle systems into all correlation settings, operation system. Change it again. What's changed information setting, right? All right, so 0. So it gets very complicated. So 0 is lines of a box. That's to coordinate the communication position lines of travel. Directing ground centers on sequence on communications. All right, so it's box. Set position of 0 is now 4. Set position of 0 is 2 equals lines of 1. 7 lines, set lines is 0 retraction. So it's constantly changing the pattern behavior of face recognition. Into configuration setting, into voice tones, communication lines, directing ground centers, light metaphors, line communication, setting operation lines of set travel. Okay, so it changes lines of setting. Now, you can modify the position of its encryption, but you have to understand the coding signal is constantly changing its formation lines of its grounds, powers, and atmospheres into its position of its modems, satellites, and its towers of communication. Right? So nothing is ever at the same frequency because it's a running operation system that constantly has a constant continuous flow of building things new, not what you're identifying, what you already created, coming into new aspects of yourself that's already modified through yourself in that position location of its operation system, knowing that you've already done everything through its equation. But you have to understand how to operate the VR system to identify zeros and ones of ABCs and 1, 2s, and 3s. So it's a constant continuous chain of a flow that changes the quantums of time frame location of the clock and that changes operation location setting to zeros and ones of platform. Okay? All right, so let's have position lines of 4 panels, box frame, triangulation over lines and over line signal, dimensional line rotation, solar sail line rotations, course centers calculated lines, 4 lines of panels, directing lines, centers, line screen, adaptation of flux. Okay, very complicated stuff, but it's all connected to an online chart. Right, which is a point chart wave, what processes your betting system location of travel. Very complicated stuff. Okay, but it's absolutely fantastic when you see it in all lines of different parallels in travel communications. Now, converting that system, okay, comes into your data assets, and remember, it's all processed how you see it through indication of a building with zeros and ones in traction. So we got an E force, E correlates center course, directing line connections, E flux, screen adaptations, and bending over lines of sequence. Cross lines of bending over set lines, travel point lines, defaults, erase, enabled, location setting, and classification. Now, processing that indication setting, you can do it online center line screen lines in that direct locations, or you convert the system of zeros and one location lines at sacred geometry, directing ground centers on line set positions. All centers at grounds, process of indication lines of 4 center lines of travel. Directing on center on sequence, clocking centers of 0 line rotation lines of travel, and set position operation. So in that position lines of setting, you start to recognize how to communicate to your properties of set design. Okay, so it's kind of like understanding where the zeros and ones go in placement of its position to its all of its compartment system. Now changing timeline centers, process back to 0, which is fail safe, then you go to 0, 1. But 0, 1 is always energizing in set location, changing the 0, 1s of flux because you're constantly in communication, like online center location incognitos, directing ground centers in position line centers of cloak and dagger and set calculation. Okay? So it's a constant continuous flow of travels of recognition. Okay? Nothing ever stops inside the set position. It's mind alteration. It's a constant continuous flow of zeros and ones traveling through a magnetic force, right? So as you get up, zeros and ones are getting you up. And it's all connected to your binary, that's all connected to your cloud, that's connected to your galaxy alignments that process everything, how you see the indications of your line communication to your crown, that indicates its mapping system through its binary course centers that convert the system, its codex. It's very complicated stuff, guys, but it's a lot of fun. Okay, all through travel, all through setting, all through positions, all through operation. Okay, very powerful stuff. Okay, so it's kind of like you see it in the walls, you see it in your panels, you see it in your floors, you see all indicates the setting, which is nothing but a traffic runway. And we understand that through its highway, understand through its segway. So once you understand how to convert this system and understand how to use it through zeros and ones, it's much easier to identify how you communicate, okay, with yourself through zeros and ones, because that's how computer operates. That computer is on and off at the same time, but it's always in different pattern recognition. It's constant in its own energetic flow of pattern communication. Okay? But they all work together and sent lines of signal. So the constant changes schematics of primers. Okay, so I was like, oh, it's a lot to take in, eh? All right, so let's start with the basics. The basics. This is so far beyond measure. When you see everything in position of the matrix itself, this is what you start to see in the actual sim. Okay, all through structure of a building, of what's above and what's below. Okay. It's absolutely amazing. So creating those point chart graphs is calculated, modified. Let's set lines of sequence locations, 13 setting. That's the higher self. Okay, standby. Higher self and standby and 13 lines of channel. Okay, so you can add lines of 3 centers of zeros, 2 centers of measure, 1 center operation, and triangulation of flux. Okay? All right, so that correlates the communication to its pyramid set lines of travel. 0, just 0 itself, right? All right, so equal lines of setting the equations, triangulation, and that line corresponds with its box frame communication lines set position of its highway. Set operation lines of sequence, right? There's the piece of pie. All right, now that coordinates position here in position lines centers, travel point lines of graph, 3 lines of centers, operation lines of sequence locations. Now that converts lines, set lines, all line course centers, time frame, time calculations, time setting, time operation, time flux, time center, time converts into primer circuit, primer line centers, operation line sequence, time calculation, time interference, time rotations, time line center, location consistent online. So in that line course centers, at the direct lines of panel, the process indicates the system all through calculation. Okay? So, and then you create highways around it. Okay, highways around the segue. Going that way and you go this way. So I'm just showing you what the zeros and ones do as they constantly change the voice panel. So let's go indicate 3 centers of travel and 2 centers of scale, process lines of indications, set operation line, set position. There it is in the highway. Okay, graph communication convergence, all through setting of operation. Okay, travels all together. Go to paste lines. Okay, so triangulation of 1 over center, 1 rotation, 1 travels, point lines of graph and data. Okay, computer art coding, directing lines of grounds. Graph communication convergence, box frame, triangulation over lines of fly, travels point lines of graph, inline course centers, and position location to its setting. Operation sequence, set up point lines of graph, indicates system all through setting of operation. Okay, window frames, travel point lines of graph of indications. Okay, box frames of travel and set calculation. Okay, so it's all about identifying how to basically change the triangulations into zeros and ones. Okay, same with the box. You have the box. Okay, how do you want to circulate inside line? In, out, audio. In, out, audio. In, set position. Fibonacci line, rotation 1 service, 1 traction, 1 division. Okay, rotation lines of spins, open line signals. Okay, but if you look really, really close and it spins really, really fast, you can see letters, numbers, shapes coming in lines of setting. Okay, you see the numbers coming in? Okay, so you have to stand what come in position. 1 over 6, triangulation over box. Okay, and position location time reactor. Okay, so every time you spin it, it correlates the communication lines position. Change the time reactor. Sets lines of Y, 6 equals 1, box frame. 1 over lines, 1, 1, 1, 1. Okay, so every time I do that, it's constantly changing time frame, time replacement, time calculations. Time indicates the system of its information bits, the process of system lines of travel. And if I keep going really, really fast, you start to see the coordinates of communication of letters, numbers, shapes, and position through constellations. All right, so that converts the set position of triangulation over lines into box. Position of 6, 6 over lines of question over mark. Okay, so every time I constantly change this, it's constantly changing zeros and ones. Okay, but it comes from the center operation of indications and travel. Okay, if I bring it in closer, you can start seeing the zeros and ones going around and around, right? So it's all about understanding that's all through a box too, just the box itself. Now, once the zeros and ones understand the conversion, now it has to really understand how to use the pattern of behavior. Getting that position lines of setting is extremely important in set travel. Now, this is very complicated stuff, but you have to indicate this because your bodies are going to be radioactive after school. So let's get in alpha. Let's get into beta. Okay, split lines of anomaly. Anything you split is AB. All right. So you have to stand A, and you have to stand B. AB, you have to stand B, and you have to stand AB. Okay. as it goes up through channel of operation, right? So it's creating platforms and set lines at set position. Then it comes into its umbrella, okay? Then it comes into its conversion, okay? Then it comes into its online centers, on sequence, on communication to its webbing system, all through operation, okay? All lines of all position, line, and setting. But if I go really, really fast, you can see letters, numbers, shapes, and symbols going around the line signal. So it's position 0, 1, 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 1, 0, 1, 0, 0, 1, right? So they go through the outside, and then you triangulate inside, creating the structure of schematics, setting operation line connections to its primer of its primer and set position lines of travel. So it's really interesting when you look at it all through all different angles. Okay, very complicated stuff. So the outer structure becomes the inner structure. That's an intercourse communication intercept. It direct lines the link of communication to its system all through travel. Okay, so as you're going through Fibonacci line centers, it's outlining the signals going inside rotation. All right, all through divisions, all through line connections. Okay, overlapping, analyzing, overlying course centers and position lines of travel as an online set correlates and setting a time frame. All through setting, all through operation, right? All right, this is all through string theory of 0, 1 through calculation. This is all 0, 1. Okay, so radioactive. Okay, specifications. Know exactly what you're doing through alpha and your betas. It's set lines of travel. Okay, so string theory is very important because it connects your system and settings and lines of link that lines the locations of energy signature lines, energy paths, process core centers that communicate lines position all through setting. So I set a line signal, 3 centers that set position all lines into snowy graph interference. Through our signals working all together in lines of travel, right? But if I go really, really, really fast, you can start seeing the numbers, letters, shapes, and symbols on the lines and the outline scale. Okay, outline perimeter, outline setting. Okay, 0, 0, 1, 0. We got 2 lines of signal. Okay, now I change the graph line and it's Schumann resonance location. Travis point lines of graph indicate lines of flux, right? All right, so that's position negative, 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 positive. Okay, so it converts the system back to tractions. Waving line signals, ground centers of sequence, 4 centers of flux, 5 centers of measure, 8 centers of travel. Calculate screen lines, adaptation, and process line connection, converts the system all through setting. Okay, so it's knowing how to create the graphs of communication system through alpha beta. All right, so remember, everything is traveling on a constant continuous flow through the mind adaptation to its system through networks of its own quantum self. Now we have to understand how to energize our own set location, our own flux, time capacity, body capacity, its placements, a time replacement in that position location, time calculation, setting the stream. Lacing lines, rotation lines of one line signal, one travel, one direction, one locations. Go really, really fast. Okay, you can't see it, but I can see it. But what you're seeing is what you want to see. Is identify how fast you're going, how you understand that you're seeing the outline numbers into the inline rotation of spectacles that creates the perimeter and set lines of travel. 0, 0, 0, right? So you have to exactly know the temperature reading, where it's at in set position. Is it alpha, beta, theta, omega, zeta, zeta, gamma, right? So it's got line signals over cross, set lines operation, signal line center interference, directing online centers, segways over lines, highways over tractions, directing inline centers, line sequence of travel communication. That's what it is in set position, right? Okay, the faster you go, then you start to see the alphabetical system, lacing lines, correlations of travel, directing inline calculation setting, outline signals, and rotation lines of surface and travel, all through calculation. Okay, so you're constantly creating a central graph of a point graph that measures everything locations, okay, to your temperature readings, okay? Alpha, beta, okay? And say beta, alpha, okay? Theta, and that position lines of travel, okay? Travel lines, set line direct location lines, and position operation lines of sequence. So if you understand the connections to the higher self, then you understand what a Schumann resonance is to its system, all levels of a temperature reading. It's all levels how you see yourself into your body line frequency is 98. Okay, temperature reading. Okay, your Earth is 98 times 1,000, which is 100,000 lines square root. Whoa. So that's 98,000 line measure in box frame triangulation of triangulation box. Okay, through flux. Okay. That's the temperature reading that your Earth is at. Okay, anything above that settings, you're going through melting point in set lines of travel. Too fast in set sequence. That off lines the convert system of void that lines its rotation system and lines the communication position all through calculation. Right? So it's important to understand how to keep yourself balanced and position a box frame into a bracket frame and travel. Okay, correlates the calculation and travel communication settings, sets the barometers and the thermometers, location of triangulation, position of box over 3 centers of measure, and a solar sail or rotation lines of sequence. It's complicated stuff, guys, but it's a lot of fun. How you use zeros and ones to travel, right? So if I look at one line signal, let's start with this one, right? That's a 1. This is a 1. This is another 1. There's 3 ones in setting. Okay? They all travel in sequence, right? So they all line their signals all through travel. All you're doing is creating schematics of teleportation. And you identify how you do it through zeros and ones. Okay, so as you have the design line, okay, you change formation lines of grids. There's the platforms. Okay, so in that position, outline signals, you have a graphing screen in the bottom frame. We refer that as a measure scale and set lines of communication, a box frame, and a window frame. All right, so directing lines are set in location lines. Let's set in A lines of B. Okay, B over C. And line set locations into 1. Set over lines of 2. Process over 3. Okay? So all you're creating is schematics, and the zeros around is the platform. That process, it keeps it line centered, that keeps the motivation system, comes into the frame lines of the body, and the body starts moving through zeros and ones at all levels of attraction. Okay? I know it's complicated, right? So you have your zeros and ones and platform. You can indicate equal line, triangulation box, you set question mark. You can add flash drive interference. You can add line communication position of keyboards, key position lines. It's all specifications how you directly calculate and modify. You use your cells into modification setting. Information bits, dibits, or davits. Or lines of ingredient, location, system calculations. So we get A, B, C over 3, 3 over line, 0, 0, 0 over 1 over flux. Okay, so that's going to be set up in line setting. Okay, so we change timeline centers. We add align centers. So that's 0. That automatically turns in position. Remember, 0 is never 0 and turns it and lines position after you go in position after 0 lines of position as travel. 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3. You always go back to 0, then you go back, okay, to another frequency that changes the time frame. Okay, so I changed the position of 0, 1 into all lines. Travels endpoint lines graph in position. Now I can change it to 0, I can change it to O, I can change it to A, or I can change it to B. And that's what you have to modify through. Creating that inventory first is understanding how to go from 0 to 12, how to go from symbols to 0 to 12, how to go from letters, shapes, and symbols in that position of 0 to 12. 24, 48, 72, 144 platform. Set lines of flux over screen, directing ground set line course centers into position location of your system all through traction. All right, so that converts lines of 0, okay, equals C. Okay, 0, okay, equals B. All right. Now you have to understand what 0 means, because it's not 0 now, because you're changing frequencies. Remember, you have a time scale, time measure, time balance. So it correlates communication lines oxidized levels, that process corresponds to oxidation systems, that process location setting, position location of travel, that has a direct line communication to position your flux, that changes time measure and scale of communication setting in communication its convergence, all through traction, alpha locations. Okay? This is an outline, this is an inline rotation. Right? Now you can correlate the position lines of L tracks, put zeros and ones above line center. So all the zeros and ones are just rails of communication. Okay, so you indicate around the system, outside through traction. And the schematics are created from inside through its perimeter. Perimeter is the center operation of teleportation setting through truth and false narrative. All right? Okay, so you work with the zero lines, but you have to line signal them. So I'm going to go with my position of 0 over B. 0, we're going to center operation. Now you can go through timeline centers and process communication. It's totally fine. Or you can go chronological order. It doesn't matter. So either way, you're line signaling everything at set location of sim. How you modify that location with simulation. All right, so we got 0, position over 0, 2, and that position line is a setting, 0 line operation of 0, C lines of rotation, course centers, 3 convergence lines of 3 zeros and line course centers, solar sail and rotation lines of track location. Okay, it's a very complicated map, but it's sent to the lines of set locations. How you convert this to them to zeros from outside, which is the outer rings. The inner rings is the 0, 1s that interconnect setting to interweb. That interlines with link lines of communication and data processing lines to your point graphs, center graphs, correlation graph, communication graphs, CPU graphs. Everything's a graph that you have to understand positions of, because your temperature reading is constantly changing flux. And to understand that is a gravitational pull that has a compressor that basically keeps you guys in confinement in position of pressure itself. So your pixelations don't go out in set position. They stay within the conversion system of compressing in and out at the same time. That's what keeps you together. That's what keeps you in solid matter. But the solid matter is crystal. It's not physically line attached. It's mentally line attached. And that puts you into the metaforce, into your metahumans in line operation, line course centers, and graphing screen, and adaptation of flux that process the indication system all through travel communication. Okay, and it travels all together. As I'm doing this in position of rotations, it's changing time flux, right? So the panels of operation of the position lines of string theory has now changed the graph communication to a system through primer. Very complicated stuff, right? But I'm just showing you how the converting system of the brain conceptual setting, how it sees this into its its hardware and its software and travel. Okay, so the 0, 1s are basically the runway. Okay, you're on basically the treadmill. And you have to truly understand how the 0s and 1s goes through its planes into all levels and set positioned with different dimensional layers that it goes in lines of sequence. So it's all communicates in settings. So every time I change the flux, it changes the 0s, 1s of travel. All through indication setting, right? So we got a clock in 0. And we got 4 communication lines in computer coding. Process lines of 4 centers, line course centers, direct lines of link that process communication. Right? So it's very complicated as you go higher in the minds of position. All right? But that's the Schumann graph. All right? And it's all dimensioned to a solar sail. A dimensional solar sail. You have to understand how to travel through the 0s and 1s. So it gets more complicated as you go higher in the mind through the lacing lines of communication or sonorograph interference. Sonorograph interference of box frame is just the void itself, just black and white. Okay? Just black and white, right? Snowy graph, right? So it's between channels of operation. Your CCTV and that position is balance. Okay? So I'm just going to go through the lines. So these are all transits. Now we're going to go through transit divots and davits. Okay, process of indicates setting. Transformer units, directing line course centers of flux. So you can see the convergent setting and computer coding. It gets very complicated, guys, but it's a lot of fun. It's a travel. Okay? So it's like an abstract drawing. The painter knows what it's drawing. Everybody else basically decides what they think it is, right? So this is what we have to truly get out of, is how you see a painting. You don't see the same painting. You see a painting how you see a painting. It's all done through your own coding, your 0s and 1s. But you have to modify the 0s and 1s, how you did it through creation in your settings, through your cell modification. Those are your cells. Okay? Cells, right? Inside your system. So you have to really understand it's complicated stuff. How it all works inside of you. What's going on in the seconds, minutes, and hours in your system through flux. All right. All right, so cell modification lines of divots over davits, information lines of computer coding, directing line course centers into gigawatts. Okay, setting travels, point lines of graph. Now that indicates lines of direct lines and security lines of communication positions. Process over lines. Inside line centers and converge set mapping line, rotation lines of sequence. And set lines of travel. Okay? So we have to say how it indicates settings all through calculation screen location. Okay. Okay. On standby, on sequence, on travels, directing inline course centers, waving lines of panels. That indicates lines of setting in sequence, locates the system into its transponder, to its receivers, into its resistors of panel of operation, into all calculations of transition. Okay? It comes into faces recognitions, guys. That's all it is. Face, 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 and face. Okay? Face recognition, pattern recognition. All right. Now, that's how it works on line position lines of travel. Okay? There's a lot of faces there. That stance perceive their system where they are and converts the system of their own consciousness of its own awareness, location, and setting. Okay? But you still have to identify how to set up a centric graph and an inner line center location to its position through its operation. Okay? How you surface out, how you surface in. All right? All right, so let's get in pattern recognition of zeros and ones, ABCs, and 1, 2, 3s. All right, 0, 1 line setting. Okay, and that equals lines of 1 over 2 over 3, and set 4 on standby. Okay, travel all line centers. Okay, 4 set lines of sequence, 4 waves of outline. Converts a system of 0 outline. Okay, so I'm just going to add zeros outside lines of signal. This is line connections into inhabitation. Everything in center is you. Everything outline center is void. Everything on the other side line connection setting, okay, is the process of indication. All right, so it starts out with this position operation. Okay. Okay, all those zeros, right, are the outline perimeter, right? And you come inside the perimeter itself that crosses all angles of flux. That process that indicates the system how you do it through indication lines of travel. Direct lines of communication and setting. It's very complicated stuff, but it's a lot of fun. Okay, there's the platform. Okay. All right, so once you into that, the in sentinel course centers inside the online center on sequence, you can time jump the zeros and set coordinates of communication. That's timely, right? Now you're adding a waving line. Or you can convert the outline center, which is process line direct line connection setting, going in convergence of nebula. Cross lines of indicates lines of string lines, 1, 2, 3, cross line 4 over 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 lines of channel operation. It's very complicated stuff, but like I said, it's a lot of fun. Okay? So the convergent changes the time locks in location of its bedding system all through travel. Okay? So it's a lot more fun when you just really try to just have fun and not try to analyze, try to figure things out, because it's all codified in your system all through binary. Okay? So when you set up the binary code core centers of communication in its position, see, you move it by itself, right? I'm not touching it, it's moving itself. Every time I'm speaking, it's picking up my voice. Hello? 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 Hi, everybody. How's everybody doing today? I'm just codifying through zeros and ones so you understand what's going on through sound tone. Directing on center, on sequence, on pi. That's convergent system all through travel. Now, if I stop talking, it communicates to itself, back to its own traffic of its own runway that's operating its own sitting, which is its own constellation system of its own surfacing engine. Okay? So when you stop talking, everything starts running. Everything's always running. So it doesn't matter if you're not speaking, you're always speaking in your mind. But you speak through the mind first, which is zeros and ones. And that's how you channel in and channel out at the same time. Okay? Okay, direct line link of zero line offline course centers, directing inline center line communicates position all through mapping line rotation lines of sequence. The process indicates the setting and travel. Okay, so I change the energetic graph communication of human resonance of flux. Okay? I'm not speaking. It's speaking to you. Okay? As soon as I start talking, it picks up my pattern. It picks up my recognition. It picks up my voice panel. It picks up my light metaphor. That's what you have to start indicating. How powerful you are, how you indicate your position locations and setting, how to operate your system inside lines, position all through flux. Time capacitor, body capacitor, all through compliance. Now, once you understand how to use that in that information system, you start to recognize everything around you of frequency of set design. Okay, all through setting, all through operation. Okay, and you work together, a unification of one, of travel. Okay, complicated though when you see it, right? So zeros and ones can create anything to its enemy, a truth and false narrative. We already know what the false is. It's the negative of everything. We already know what the truth is, the indication of you inside of you. So if you go through a flush line, in triangulation, in position line Fibonacci, right? As soon as I speak, okay, it indicates position of flux by time. It changes correlations of communication to its time setting. See? See what it's doing? So it's picking in my sound barrier. My sound barrier is this. That's what it picked up, me speaking. Okay? Now if I do this, it's a rotation of spin. Process in that position lines ascending, 0 calculation over lines, 0 correlations over travel, 0 correlations lines of panel, 0 offline center line position, 0 calculates line screen adaptation, and 0 process of indication. But it's all travel, all set lines of communication all at once. Okay? So it's really interesting when you come into that design, which is nothing but a mapping system of travel. Okay? So the zeros and ones can go this way, outside line, inside travel, outside line, inside travel, outside line, outside, 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 outside. Okay? So there's so many ways zeros and ones can travel through all indication setting. All through setting, all through operation. Okay? Very powerful stuff through indication. Okay? All right, so when you get that position lines of setting, 0 comes over 0, creates a platform. That's compass over line, correlation lines of calculus setting, pi generation lines and set position, I line division. Correlate communication, this is all inside the eye. Look at that. Boom. Look how powerful it is. Look how powerful it is. Now, when you set up the grain graphs, correlation line signals, graphs its communication setting at all different angles, all through travel, all through direct location setting to graph of communications, right? Then you cross the flux, cross-referencing, time frame, line course centers, screen lines, adaptation, and travel. Okay, very powerful inside line, the eye line center. Okay, center communication inside line center. Set communication, pi lines, time frame. Set position of 1, course centers of pi, in position, all center line conditions, 14 line signals, 1:20 p.m. 1:20 p.m. And that's how you see light tractions, light direct location, and reflection all through the eye-line sequence. It's 1:20 p.m. Okay? Through the oversoul. The oversoul is the oversoul of the earth and position of space. And that's converts into everything that's in nothing, which masses everything of its equation of no memory, of inside and outside through its equation. Now, for you guys to identify these things, you have to let go of everything of story and just see yourself of empty space inside and empty space outside of your provision. All through tractions, all through light, all through time, right? So if I change time frame, look at the line position and settings, all through travel, all through flux, all through indications, all through set operation. Okay, if I change it again, remember your eye coordinates all communication lines of flux over time frame and track, of course, send the communication setting to its convergence. Right, so it's very powerful when you start to recognize what's going on in set position inside the eye, all through Fibonacci, all through rotation, zeros and ones. Graphing screen set lines of 0 1s over line centers, cross lines and set course centers, and matrix line, direct lines at inventory, and set lines of communication, all through travel. Okay, so digital frame and your eyes go up and down. So you got panels this way, panels up this way. And this is just zeros and ones, guys. This is not in triangulation box. This is not through symbols or letters or shapes. You have to indicate zeros and ones, especially with the radioactive system. Knowing exactly what's going on in revision, your temperatures and your thermometers and your barometers and your kelvins and your Celsius and your Fahrenheit and set lines of communication. All through graph, all through magnetic, all through force, into all line course centers of time communication. Of center of operation of you inside the online division of location. Wow. And that's all happening inside your eyes. Right now, through the oversoul, inside and outside at the same time. Right? But you can't have any solid matter, or you can't travel through extensional speed in explorations. The process of communication sending has to let everything go of density and toxicity locations and travel. Then once you get in balance, you can see how fast you can go through all set position. This is your perimeter that's set up in travel at rotation. And it's all identifying how you use it through zeros and ones. Okay? All through frame, all through window. Okay? In your seconds, minutes, and hours. All through travel. Okay? And you can see it in all different angles too. All right? So every time you change your online centers, your grids are changing. Okay, they're creating more platforms of set lines of EQ and set lines of travel. These are your flaps. What's above and what's below. Okay, but this is your eye here. This is your eye here. Okay, these are your browse adapters. These are changing frame lines. Okay, they change the clocking lines, screen lines to your system. Okay, start to see your whole body is nothing of a trinity, of a triality. Process that indicates how everything inside your system is line signal location your clock into the foundation of time. How you modify that position location, you understand how to indicate that all lines of travel all at once. Right? So the graph is now changed again. So that indicates line calculate setting. You change your iron lines of sequence and set lines of platform. All right, change again. Okay, see how your eye constantly changes? Change again. So what's it creating? Its own teleportation of the line itself. Modifying that line's course centers come circulation and rotation lines of grounds and online sequence line communication with position. Sets calculation ground centers online set positions on the fly. Inline rotations and travel. In a constant continuous flow of travel communications. Now, if you look really, really close, you can see the film strip of design of what I'm doing in seconds, minutes, and hours through pi, right? So that's convergence set position lines of travel. Set communication lines of two-phase friction of time frame. Set lines of travel, set communication and convergence, all through setting operation lines of sequence. All through setting, all through operation. Okay, it doesn't matter which way you go, you're always going forward, you're never going back in your minds. Because you already processed this already. So in that convergence system, it's understanding frames per second, frames per mile, calculus of square root. Set lines of indicate lines of screen lines, adaptation set position location to its atom of rotation lines of grounds. Look at all the singularity of a synchronization system, a string theory, and set travel. Whoa. And that's all happening in your eye. That's a lot of activity, don't you think? Look at that, all in the eye. Unbelievable. Eyes of the windows of the soul at travel. Amazing what you can do when you fully go inside and outside at the same time. Crystalline inside and crystalline outside of your system. And the only thing you focus on is what? Continue on. Because you've done everything already through equation. All right, but that's all done through the Einstein sentence spectrum. So, graphing screen is knowing exactly how to indicate position location, how things come out of your TVs, right? Well, it's the same thing with your outlines. Okay, taking things out of frame. That's it. Coming out. Right? So you create that through an online. Zero calculation online centers on sequence. Outside lines of perimeter. Change the time frame. Change coordinates of time frame. Change provision lines of time frame. Now we're going to go through Fibonacci. Fibonacci, 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 Fibonacci. Look what I created through zeros and ones. Whoa. Change it this way. Look what I created through zeros and ones. Whoa. So we all have to identify that now. because you guys are no lines and settings of triangulation box anymore. You're getting out of this. And once you disappear this becomes zeros and ones now. Outside frame, inside traction. I know it's complicated, eh, guys? So this is what you guys are starting to see now. Okay, get in that position of balance. Okay, starting with that. From that to that now. Okay, same with the box. Okay, then once you start how to see all levels, how everything's created through your sim, then you see how to create it through your thoughts, action, motion, which starts off with zeros and ones. All through setting. Triangulation box. Say goodbye to this, say hello to that. Through radioactive signals of alpha beta. All right. Okay, and then you work with inside the setting. Then you create a webbing system, then you create a highway. Then you create your primers. So primers can be this way, in that position, right? Bring it in and set lines of travel. Okay? Okay, crossing online simulants over traction, all the location setting, position of conversion system, all through calculations. Direct length, directing panels. Set lines of over 2 over set lines, 3 centers over travel. Direct line, laser line core centers, Skynet lines of high core centers, a flux over screen. Directing inside line communication position to its operators and set lines of travel. Okay? All through 0. Just 0, guys. There's your Skynet, of what you work with in seconds, minutes, and hours in frame. Okay? All right, so once you get in that position, it's much easier to modify that into the simulation. Okay? Now you can change the zeros over lines of flux, but you have to be careful what you do through time centers, time frame, that indicates line course centers of dimensional sail that rotates the routers, locates the setting of Fibonacci. Okay, so it gets more complicated as you go higher in the webbing system of travel. So I'm just trying to get you guys to understand how you guys are going through triangulation now. All through this, so webbing system, right? Because you're no longer in this in set position. You're out of this equation. You're coming into this settings in set position. Okay, that's next, which is radioactive. Okay, so an alpha beta is a process that indicates lines ascending of 0 over 1 over flux. Now we have to understand how to indicate position of the grounds, the powers, and the opposite lines of set location of travel. Now it indicates position of sacred geometries that are given to you through a pentagraph. A pentagraph is basically a core centers of communication sending that processes your system locations, how you indicate position of existing into the platforms of LC over 1. Now that process lines of indicates lines of box over frame, triangulation over flux, or flux capacitor over screen. Okay, and it travels very fast. You can't see it, right? Because I've already indicated the zeros and ones, right? But it's moving on its own system, see? I'm not talking. It's converting to itself through zeros and ones. So it's trying to talk to me, right? So it's saying, general, your zeros and ones are line settings, the center operation line sequence. You have 3 panels, a 0 line, offline center, and communication position. There's the shape, right? Now I convert the system. Now the widescreen's offsetting. General, you need the line center location of 0, turn into Fibonacci line, rotation lines of spin, process course center triangulation, marking screen, adaptation lines, molecule design line course centers, information bits, 1,000 line centers of seconds over frame over calculation. Okay? Now understanding how to communicate is understanding through 0 and 1. All you're creating is a teleportation vessel through your letters, numbers, shapes, and symbols. Remember I told you dimensional solar sail, now you're doing it through zeros and ones. Everything has to travel. Nothing is a frame of this embedded. Okay? Nothing's bedded. Everything's moving extremely fast. You have to understand how to go through a dimensional solar sail. All through travel, all through communication. Right? Doesn't matter. Everything's traveling, right? You can't have 0 on standby if you don't understand what standby is. This is standby on 0. Okay? This is underscore of 0. We already know that, right? This is plus over 0, which is above the 0. Okay? 0.0 negative plus line of 0. Okay? So once you get into that, Then you get into the alphabetical system, then you get into the adding, then you get into multiplication, then you get into subtraction, then you get dividing, and then you get in rotations and probation. The position location through a system is all done through travel of communications, guys. Okay, but you can't see it because it's going too fast. But you know it's there in travel until you bring it in set position, how it's operating in set lines of travel. Okay. It's moving on its own. But I'm speaking in the mind now. I'm talking to the mind to this. I don't need to speak here. I need to speak here. See how fast it's moving? So I'm communicating constantly in the mind, 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, but I'm constantly changing the flux, I'm constantly changing the time zone. I'm constantly having an ongoing conversation, just like you would have an ongoing conversation 20 minutes later. 20 minutes line position of Earth, 20,000 line seconds on space. Everything is in the mind of inception itself. That's how things move on by itself. And the more you do that, the more it gets much easier how to go through that through travel. I just showed you. I don't need to speak here. It wants me to speak here. Now it's still. Now it's trying to understand you. It doesn't see you in your mind. It sees you in confusion. So it goes back. It's rotating back now. By itself. So, lot to understand, eh? 100% of the mind the whole time, eh? All through setting, all through operation. Okay, look how fast that's going. What is it creating now? What's it creating? A clock. Clock, 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 clock. Okay? So you have to go beyond the measure, go beyond the scale, go beyond the balance, all in frequency and line position. So getting out of this and coming into that. All through webbing, all through design of 0. Okay? That's the next level. Stay tuned for more. So, helping you guys out, get you to really, really understand how you do more levels of the mind, you start to see things move a lot more faster in real time. But the more you look at things outside, the more you get in resistance inside. That's why you can't be a body, a fraction line communication, a fractal, a set design, in position of a story. You have to convert inside and outside at the same time and measure. That balances everything that you do through travel. And it's all indicated how you process that in the mind of volume. That puts you in all lines of all communication in that setting. So the more you complicate the drawing, the more it gets easier in design. Okay? It's the other way around. Okay? Creating something more complicated is a lot more fun because it travels faster. And there's a higher levels of indication of what you're doing through travel. As I'm moving my hand, look. You have no idea how many fingers I'm showing. You have no idea how fast I'm going. Right? But I know because I'm doing it through my mind. Everything is not just done through the mind. Everything is processed through the mind. Everything is calculated and triangulated through the mind. So the more you understand that, the more it's easier to communicate with everything inside that operates everything outside of your set position, which is your environment. Okay? All right, so triangulation of flux. We're going to process line centers and line course centers of communication in pattern. Directing 0 lines over lines of 1, indicates over 2, process over 3 over pi. Okay? See? See the void come in? See? It wants me to create a center. It's amazing how it comes in that track center location of systems all through operation. Alright, so it wants me to create a center and center it in. Now I'm communicating with it inside. Okay, now if I bring it in, so we're lines of signal. Once we create another center, I'll operationalize the sequence. Okay, so let me do this and bring it in. Let me rotate it. Faster, 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 faster. Okay, and then you start to see a picture. You start to see a frame. You start to see a window. Okay, you start to see all levels of vision, a cortex, an image, which is the earth. So you have to be inline setting, directing, direct and redirect. Linked in your system, and set course centers how fast you're going in your minds. Okay, so set find the setting sequence and travel. So it wants me to create the earth. There's the earth. Okay, and there is the face. There's the face of the earth. Okay, so every time you're communicating, it constantly changes the vision, the cortex of zeros and ones. It's always a different image. Okay, so it's 2 lines of signals, solar systems, and flash drive. Okay, now what is it now? 2 phase rotations and direct lines of grounds and position lines of operation. What is it now? Right? So, is this truly getting in that position to its settings, guys, all through operation? Okay? So, but it's amazing how you see everything in eye division. Okay? It comes from here, people, not from here. It's from this and through, right? So it's like when you breathe in, you breathe out. You breathe in, you breathe out. You're breathing from in. You're not breathing out. You're breathing in. And you guys should know that. And it's about stuff that you don't want in your system. You breathe it out. So it's a constant, continuous flow of internal, external force. Internal, external out. Internal, external out. Internal, external out. Okay? 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 That's all it is. Okay? It's already in conception, you just have to blow it out. But you have to stand the internal to the external force that puts you in pressure of decompressing system. Okay, to understand that and set position of its operation. Don't stop, keep going. Changing channels. You don't know if my hand is going up or down. See how amazing it is? Look at that. Look at my hand. It's going in all directions all at once. Creates a geometry shape. And that's what you have to get in positions of. Okay? The faster you go, the more you understand. Okay? The slower you go, you get more confused. So it's the actual opposite. To everything is the inner line center to the online rotation to the outline connections. It's the connection to the inside of the emptiness that you have to modify through to understand how you use it into the nothingness of no memory. Now, when you come no memory of inside and no memory of outside, you continue on. Okay? And then you really get a true understanding of how to communicate to your 7 through your line centers, how you communicate that service, and how you identify that through zeros and ones of ABCs and 1, 2, 3s. Okay? So there you go in set position. All done through equation. All right. Okay, classification lines. We'll go through core sends into endorphins, directing ground sends line segregation to Sumerian cortex, indirect lines and lines and position location after productions. Classification A, level B, C in 5.